What if the person holding you back is the one you've known the longest? What if love is costing you your peace? Have you ever stood at a crossroads, torn between staying loyal to someone familiar and choosing the path that feels more true to who you're becoming? It's a silent war many of us fight, clinging to relationships that once felt like home but now echo with tension, heaviness, and doubt. And yet, we stay. Why? Because it's family. Because it's history. Because we feel guilty. Because we're scared. But Stoicism teaches us something powerful: not every relationship is meant to walk with you forever. Some are here for a season, a lesson, but not for the long journey ahead. Today, we're going to explore 11 signs grounded in Stoic wisdom that it may be time to let go. Not with anger, but with clarity. With courage. With peace. Sign number 1, you can't grow anymore. I want to tell you something that took me over 40 years to understand. Growth isn't always about learning new skills, reading more books, or making more money. Sometimes, it's about outgrowing the spaces, and even the people, who once made you feel safe. I remember sitting in my car one evening, parked outside my childhood friend's house. We'd known each other since we were teenagers. We'd laughed, cried, celebrated birthdays, even buried parents together. But something had changed. Every time we talked, it felt like I had to shrink myself. Hide the new things I was learning. Hold back my excitement about the life I was trying to build. He'd scoff at my ideas. Mock my changes. Say things like, "You're not the same person anymore." And he was right. I wasn't. I was growing. And he was staying the same. It broke my heart to admit it. But that night, sitting in my car, I realized something simple but powerful: this relationship no longer helped me grow. It only reminded me of who I used to be, and who I could no longer become if I stayed. Seneca once wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." And that includes learning when a relationship has stopped being a source of growth and started becoming a quiet kind of prison. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just subtle. You stop sharing your wins because they won't understand. You filter your words to avoid being judged. You lower your dreams because they make others uncomfortable. And over time, your light dims, not because you weren't meant to shine, but because you were afraid to outshine the room you're standing in. That's not love. That's fear disguised as loyalty. And I get it. When you're over 40, it's hard to start over. Hard to walk away from people you've known half your life. We think, "I've known them too long. They've been there for me before." What kind of person leaves old friends behind? But Stoicism teaches us that virtue, living a good life, is more important than comfort. It reminds us to ask, am I becoming better because of this relationship, or am I just staying the same because it's easier? There's no shame in growing. And no guilt in realizing someone doesn't want to grow with you. You're not being selfish. You're being honest. And that's the first step to inner freedom. Let me be clear, this isn't about cutting people off coldly. It's about creating space for your own expansion, and gently recognizing when someone no longer fits the life you're building. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to move forward separately, with gratitude for the past and peace about the future. So if you're sitting in your car, or lying awake at night, wondering why it feels so heavy just to be around someone who used to bring you joy, maybe it's not that you've lost them. Maybe, you've simply found yourself. And that is a beautiful beginning. Now that we've talked about the weight of staying in a place where growth has stopped, let's look at another sign, one that hits even deeper. What happens when peace is no longer part of the relationship? Stay with me. Sign number 2, it's always emotional chaos. You know what surprised me the most about getting older? It's not the gray hairs, not the slower mornings, but how much I now crave peace more than anything else. Not excitement. Not attention. Just peace. But some relationships don't let you have that. They drain you. You know the ones I'm talking about. The friend who always brings drama into every conversation. The family member who turns every small thing into a crisis. The partner who swings between silence and shouting, leaving you unsure what kind of day it's going to be. I used to think it was normal. I used to tell myself, that's just how they are. They're going through a lot. I can handle it. And maybe you've said those things too. But one day I realized my nervous system was never calm. I was always on edge. Always bracing for the next emotional outburst, the next guilt trip, the next wave of anger or tears or blame. It's exhausting. And it chips away at your soul more than you realize. Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor, once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that hit me hard. Because in every emotionally chaotic relationship I held onto, I had given that power away. I let their emotions dictate my peace. Their storms became my weather. Their pain became my prison. But that's not strength. That's survival. And you deserve more than just surviving. You deserve to feel safe. To exhale. To walk into your own home, or pick up your phone, without feeling like you're stepping into a battlefield. Some people confuse love with chaos. They think intensity means connection. That yelling is passion. That silence is power. But real love, Stoic love, is calm. Grounded. Rooted in respect. It doesn't shake you like a hurricane. It holds you steady like the ground beneath your feet. If someone constantly stirs up your emotions, if you find yourself crying more than laughing, walking on eggshells more than walking in peace, it's a sign. Not that they're bad people, but that the dynamic is broken. And you don't have to live like that. You're allowed to set boundaries. You're allowed to say, "I love you, but I can't lose myself trying to hold onto you." You're allowed to protect your peace. Because peace is not a luxury. At this stage of life it's a necessity. Especially after 40, when your time, energy, and emotional space become sacred. When you've seen enough chaos to know it rarely leads anywhere good. Seneca taught us that tranquility is part of virtue. And no relationship is worth sacrificing that for. Now maybe you're thinking, but they're family. They've been in my life forever. I hear you. I've felt that too. But just because someone's been in your story for a long time, doesn't mean they deserve every chapter. You get to write the rest of your book. You get to decide who brings calm to your life, and who brings chaos. And if sign number 1 was about realizing you're no longer growing, sign number 2 is about realizing you're constantly at war. Your heart wasn't made for that. It was made to love, to build, to rest. So breathe deep, and let's keep going. Because sometimes the chaos isn't loud at all, it's silent control. And in the next sign, we're going to talk about what happens when someone quietly starts pulling your strings. Stay with me. Sign number 3, there's no respect left. In my late 40s, I sat across from someone I once trusted deeply. We were having coffee, or at least pretending to. The conversation was filled with sighs, sarcasm, and half-hearted smiles. I tried to talk about something important to me, a new opportunity one was excited about. But before I could even finish, he rolled his eyes and said, "You? Really? That's not your thing?" And then he laughed. I laughed too, out of habit. But inside, something cracked. That moment stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was just another quiet reminder that respect had slowly left the room a long time ago. You see, disrespect doesn't always come in shouting matches. It can come in quiet dismissals. In being talked over. In being made small. In jokes that aren't funny, and glances that say more than words. It's that sinking feeling of being tolerated, not appreciated. Heard but not really listened to. And maybe, you've felt that too. Marcus Aurelius believed that we are all part of a larger whole, each of us deserving of dignity. Not because we earn it, but because we are human. He wrote, "You are worth what you give yourself credit for." So I ask you, in the relationships around you, do you feel seen? Respected? Valued? Or do you find yourself constantly defending your worth, explaining your choices, trying to prove you're enough? Because if respect is missing, everything else falls apart. Without it, love becomes control. Kindness becomes obligation. And silence becomes survival. I once believed that being the bigger person meant letting things slide. I'd say to myself, they didn't mean it. They're just having a bad day. But when every day becomes a bad day, and your spirit feels bruised even in the calmest moments, it's time to pay attention. Respect is not optional. It's not a bonus. It's the foundation. And without it, you're not in a relationship, you're in a slow erosion of self. So many people stay because they're afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of what it means to walk away from someone who used to matter so much. But Stoicism reminds us, it's better to walk alone in truth than be surrounded in pretense. Seneca taught that a wise person is satisfied in their own company if the company around them offers nothing but harm. And maybe that's the lesson here, that choosing self-respect is not selfish. It's necessary. It's okay to demand kindness. It's okay to expect basic decency. It's okay to say, I won't let anyone, friend, partner, or family treat me like I'm invisible. Because you are not invisible. You are not small. You are not too sensitive for wanting to be spoken to with care. You are human. And you deserve relationships that honor that. So if sign number 1 was about losing your growth, and sign number 2 was about losing your peace, then this is about not losing your self-worth. And if you're nodding your head right now, if you feel the ache of unspoken disrespect in your life, don't ignore it. Because the next sign we're going to talk about is when disrespect isn't just silent, it becomes control. Stay with me. Sign number 4, you're being controlled. I didn't notice it at first. It started small, a little suggestion here, a raised eyebrow there. Why are you wearing that? Are you sure that's a good idea? You don't need to do that, just stay home. At first, it felt like care. Like protection. Like love. But over time, I realized I wasn't making decisions anymore. I was asking for permission. And that's when it hit me, I wasn't being loved. I was being managed. You might not recognize it right away either. Control rarely shows up in obvious ways. It disguises itself as concern. As just looking out for you. As I know what's best. But the truth is, when someone constantly questions your choices, dismisses your instincts, or slowly isolates you from your own independence, you're not in a relationship. You're in a cage. Epictetus once said, "No one is free who is not master of himself." And I started asking myself, when did I stop being the master of my own life? When did I trade my voice for approval? My freedom for comfort? I think for many of us, especially after 40, we've spent so long taking care of others, so long putting others' needs before our own, that we forget we still have the right to make choices for ourselves. But Stoicism reminds us autonomy isn't selfish. It's essential. You can't live in alignment with your values if someone else is holding the steering wheel. And maybe you've felt it too. You want to try something new, but they mock you for it. You want to reconnect with old friends, but they make you feel guilty. You want to grow, but they quietly remind you you're not allowed to change. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. But it always steals something from you. Your time. Your choices. Your identity. And here's the hard truth: love doesn't demand obedience. It invites freedom. If you're constantly second-guessing yourself, walking on mental eggshells, or feeling like your life is being scripted by someone else, that's not love. That's fear wearing a familiar face. And the Stoics would tell you this: your highest duty is not to anyone else's comfort, it's to your own virtue, your own truth, your own life. Letting go of someone who controls you isn't betrayal. It's liberation. And it's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to grieve. But don't stay stuck. Because once you reclaim your freedom, you'll begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time: yourself. So if sign number 1 was about losing your growth, sign number 2 about losing your peace, sign number 3 about losing your self-worth, then this is about losing your freedom. And you deserve to be free. Free to choose. Free to speak. Free to become. Because the next sign we'll talk about goes even deeper. What if the relationship you're in was never real to begin with? What if it's all been based on an illusion? Let's talk about that next. Sign number 5, the relationship is built on illusions. I used to think I was in love. Not just any love, but the kind you write about in journals, the kind you fight for in movies, the kind you convince yourself will last forever. But the truth? I wasn't in love with the person. I was in love with who I wanted them to be. And that wasn't the same thing. You see, illusions are tricky. They give us hope. They tell us stories. They paint over red flags with soft colors and kind memories. I told myself they'll come around. They just need time. This isn't who they really are. I was so focused on who they used to be, or who I thought they could become, that I stopped looking at who they were, right now, in front of me. And that's dangerous. Because when you're attached to the illusion, you stop living in reality. Stoicism, at its core, is about accepting things as they truly are. Not as we wish they were. Not as they once were. But as they are. Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And sometimes, what's happening to you is that you're holding onto a ghost. A version of someone that no longer exists or maybe never did. And the reaction Stoicism invites us to have is not anger, or regret, or blame, but clarity. Clarity to see when a relationship is built on fantasy, not foundation. I once knew a woman divorced at 52. She told me, I spent 20 years loving the potential of a man who never once showed me the reality. That line stayed with me. Because I realized I'd done the same. And maybe you have too. Maybe you've been telling yourself the story, they just need more time. They're going through a rough patch. Deep down, they love me, they just don't know how to show it. But here's the question Stoicism challenges us to ask: what is real? Not what you hope. Not what you imagine. But what you actually experience. Do they show up for you? Do they speak with respect? Do they support your peace, your growth, your truth? Or are you in love with an old version of them, or worse, with the version you've built in your mind because it's easier than facing the truth? There's no shame in realizing this. Only freedom. Because once you let go of the illusion, you can finally make room for something real. Something grounded. Something honest. Something whole. So if sign number 1 was about lost growth, sign number 2 about emotional storms, sign number 3 about forgotten worth, sign number 4 about lost freedom, then this one is about lost truth. And without truth, there can be no real love. In the next part, we'll talk about a sign that's even harder to ignore when the relationship starts asking you to give up your values. That's when the cost becomes too high. Stay with me. Sign number 6, you're compromising your values. There's a quiet kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises on your skin, but slowly leaves marks on your soul. It's the pain of betraying your own values for the sake of keeping a relationship alive. And I know that pain well. It started with small things. Letting a cruel comment slide because I didn't want to ruin the mood. Agreeing with things I didn't believe in just to avoid another argument. Smiling through disrespect, laughing when I wanted to speak up just to keep the peace. But it didn't feel like peace. It felt like erasure. Little by little, I wasn't myself anymore. I became a version of me that was easier for someone else to accept. And that is a high price to pay for love. You see, Stoicism teaches us that our virtue is the most important thing we own. More than money. More than approval. More than comfort. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." It sounds simple, but living by that, especially in a relationship, takes courage. Because sometimes, the people closest to us don't share our values. And instead of standing firm, we slowly bend, until we can't recognize ourselves anymore. Maybe you believe in kindness, but they reward cruelty. Maybe you value honesty, but they live behind lies. Maybe you want to grow spiritually, but they scoff at everything that brings you meaning. And still you stay. You tell yourself, it's just temporary. Maybe they'll change. I can handle this. But the truth is, every compromise of your core values chips away at who you truly are. And over time, that handling becomes hiding. That compromise becomes silence. And that silence becomes suffering. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. For he is not permitted to prove himself." And that includes the adversity of saying, "No, I won't become less," to keep someone close. Relationships should not ask you to become someone you're not. They should support your values, not challenge them. They should lift up your integrity, not erode it. Because values, they aren't just words. They're your compass. They're your truth. They are the foundation of the life you're building. And if a relationship is forcing you to twist those values, to bury them for the sake of survival, then it's not love. It's slow destruction. So if sign number 5 was about letting go of illusions, then this one is about returning to yourself. To what you know is right. To what makes you whole. You deserve to be in relationships where your values aren't just tolerated but honored. Because the moment you have to choose between love and your integrity, choose your integrity. Every time. Now, as we move forward, there's another sign that many of us overlook, not because it's hidden, but because we've convinced ourselves it's normal. It's the imbalance of giving, when you're the only one giving. Let's talk about that next. Sign number 7, there's no reciprocity. You ever feel like you're the only one trying? The only one showing up? The only one remembering the birthdays, initiating the conversations, making the apologies, carrying the weight of the connection on your back? I remember the exact moment it hit me. It was my birthday. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet dinner at home. I waited for a call. A message. A small sign that I mattered. But the silence was loud. And the worst part wasn't that they forgot. It's that I knew they would forget, because they always did. I realized I had been pouring from my cup for years, but when I looked around, no one was pouring back into mine. It wasn't a relationship. It was a one-way street. And I was the only one walking. Stoicism teaches us to live in harmony with nature, with ourselves, and with others. And harmony doesn't happen in imbalance. Seneca said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." But what if you're always the one doing the improving? What if you're the one giving advice, support, love, presence, and receiving almost nothing in return? That's not virtue. That's self-neglect disguised as loyalty. Somewhere along the way, we're taught that being a good friend, or partner, or sibling means showing up no matter what. Staying consistent. Being the bigger person. And yes, consistency matters. But mutuality matters more. You shouldn't have to earn your place in someone's life over and over again. You shouldn't feel like loving them is a job you're always at risk of losing. And you definitely shouldn't feel like your needs are too much, just because they never learned how to meet them. Marcus Aurelius taught us that self-respect is part of virtue. And sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do is stop giving so much to people who've made it clear they won't give anything back. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming clear. Clear about who deserves your energy. Clear about what you will and won't tolerate. Clear about your worth. I once heard someone say, "Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." And I felt that in my bones. Because I had. And I'm willing to bet, you have too. You gave more time than you had. More forgiveness than they earned. More love than they ever reciprocated. But not anymore. Stoicism isn't about bitterness. It's about balance. A good life is built on equal exchange of honesty, effort, presence, and care. And if you're not getting that, if you're always the one reaching across the gap, then maybe, you're meant to stop reaching. Because if sign number 6 was about protecting your values, then this one is about protecting your energy. And in the next sign, we'll talk about the one line that should never be crossed. Not ever. Because when respect is gone and safety disappears, there's only one right thing left to do. Let's talk about it next. Sign number 8, abuse in any form. This one is hard to talk about. But we have to. Because too many people are suffering in silence. Too many good hearts are stuck in places where love is twisted, and dignity is bruised. And maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've been called names, the kind you can still hear even when no one's talking. Maybe you've been controlled so tightly you forgot what it feels like to make a decision on your own. Maybe you've been hurt in ways no one can see, not on your skin, but in your spirit. And you've told yourself, it's not that bad. They didn't mean it. I must have deserved it. But let me tell you something I wish someone told me sooner: nothing justifies abuse. Not love. Not history. Not marriage. Not blood. Stoicism is not about enduring suffering silently. It's not about turning the other cheek to cruelty. It's about living a life of virtue, rooted in dignity and self-respect. And abuse in any form goes against everything Stoicism stands for. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is a slave to his passions." But abuse often comes from those who have no control over theirs. They lash out. They manipulate. They tear down, and then call it love. But real love doesn't humiliate. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't make you afraid to speak, to move, to breathe. Real love creates safety. And if you are in a relationship where you feel unsafe emotionally, verbally, physically, mentally, you are not weak for leaving. You are strong for surviving. I know it's not easy. Especially after 40. You may feel trapped by finances, by children, by guilt, by fear. You may worry what people will think. You may wonder if it's too late to start over. But listen closely, it's not. You are never too old to reclaim your life. Never too late to choose peace. Never too broken to begin again. Marcus Aurelius taught us that our greatest power lies in our ability to choose how we respond. And sometimes, the strongest response is walking away. Not in anger but in self-honor. Not to hurt them but to save yourself. Leaving an abusive relationship is not a failure. It's an act of courage. An act of truth. An act of freedom. And if you need help, ask. There is no shame in reaching out. Only strength. Because the road to healing begins with a single step, saying enough. If sign number 7 was about protecting your energy, this one is about protecting your life. You deserve to feel safe. To be respected. To wake up without fear. And in the next part, we'll explore another silent warning sign when words don't work anymore. When communication breaks down, and nothing you say seems to matter. Let's talk about that next. Sign number 9, failed communication. There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from lying in the same bed, sitting at the same dinner table, sharing the same roof, and yet feeling like your voice has no place to land. You speak but nothing changes. You explain but they don't listen. You cry but they look away. And slowly, you stop talking. Because what's the point? That is the silence of failed communication. I've lived in that silence. I've stared across the room at someone I used to know, someone I used to laugh with for hours, and felt like I was shouting through glass. And it's not always about yelling. Sometimes it's worse. It's the cold quiet. The emotional distance. The polite conversations that feel like small talk with a stranger. And over time, you realize something heartbreaking, you've both stopped trying. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, when someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. But here's the truth, even the most grounded person still needs to be heard. We're human. We connect through words, through understanding, through emotional presence. And when that's gone, when you feel like you're living with someone who's closed the door from the inside, that's a sign you can't ignore. Stoicism doesn't promise us perfect relationships. It teaches us to navigate imperfect ones with wisdom, honesty, and reason. So when communication fails, Stoicism asks, have I spoken clearly? Have I listened deeply? Have I taken responsibility for my part? But after that, if nothing improves, if words become weapons, or walls, or empty noise, then staying becomes a form of self-abandonment. A healthy relationship doesn't require perfect speech. It requires effort. Effort to understand, to clarify, to repair. And when that effort disappears, when your attempts are met with silence or defensiveness or mockery, you're not building a connection. You're being ignored inside a conversation. It's like watering a plant that's already dead. Seneca wrote, "A quarrel is quickly settled when deserted by one party, there is no battle unless there be two." But what happens when there's no quarrel at all, just quiet avoidance? That silence becomes its own kind of pain. Not loud, but constant. And you deserve more than that. You deserve to be heard, to be understood, to have conversations that heal, not hurt. So if sign number 8 was about protecting yourself from abuse, this one is about protecting your need to be known. Because without communication, there is no relationship, just two people pretending they still belong. And in the next part, we'll talk about something deeper than words, your peace. What happens when a relationship constantly disturbs your inner calm? Let's talk about that next. Sign number 10, it steals your peace. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. It's the kind that creeps in when you're constantly on edge. When the moment they walk into the room, your stomach tightens, not because of excitement, but because you're bracing for what might come next. Maybe it's a harsh tone. Maybe it's a passive-aggressive sigh. Maybe it's nothing at all, and yet your body already knows, this relationship no longer feels safe. And I say this with love, when a connection costs you your peace, it costs too much. I remember a morning not long ago. Coffee in hand, sun just rising. But instead of enjoying the stillness, I felt the weight of dread. Why? Because I knew who I'd have to talk to that day. I knew the tension, the way they'd pick apart my words, the way every conversation felt like walking a tightrope. That was the moment I realized this is not love. This is survival. Marcus Aurelius taught that one of our greatest pursuits should be inner tranquility. He wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. Retreat to it often." But how can you retreat to your own soul, when your mind is constantly under siege by someone who's supposed to bring you peace? How can you breathe freely when every interaction feels like a quiet storm, unpredictable, subtle, but always unsettling. Peace is not a luxury. It's not something we earn later. It's a requirement for a life well lived. Especially after 40, when you've lived enough to know what matters most. And peace? It matters. It matters more than pleasing others. More than keeping up appearances. More than holding on to something that once made sense, but now only makes you anxious. The Stoics didn't chase chaos. They sought alignment. A calm within that couldn't be shaken by external noise. And sometimes, the greatest source of noise is the very relationship we refuse to question. If you find yourself sighing more than smiling, overthinking every word, dreading every call, asking yourself, is it me? Again and again. Take a step back. Not with blame, but with awareness. Ask, does this person bring calm to my life, or conflict to my spirit? And remember, peace doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It means having relationships where conflict is met with respect, and resolved with care, not where conflict is a daily atmosphere. So if sign number 9 was about being unheard, then this one is about being unsettled. And you weren't meant to live in tension. You were meant to rest. To grow. To breathe. In the final sign, we'll explore something foundational. Respect. Because when that's gone, nothing else can stand. Let's talk about it next. Sign number 11, lack of mutual respect. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly respected by the person you're holding onto? Not just tolerated. Not just put up with. But genuinely seen for your worth, your dignity, your humanity. Because without mutual respect, no relationship can truly survive. And even if it does survive, it won't feel alive. I learned this the hard way. There was someone in my life, a longtime friend. We had history, shared experiences, and moments that felt like family. But somewhere along the way, respect started to erode. They'd speak over me. Interrupt when I talked. Belittle my decisions, not with shouting, but with subtle comments and smirks. At first, I brushed it off. I thought, they're just joking. They don't mean harm. But slowly, I realized I was walking into every interaction feeling smaller than when I came in. That's not friendship. That's not love. That's erosion of the self. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, treat every man as if he were what he ought to be, and you help him become what he is capable of being. That's respect. It's not just about politeness. It's about treating each other as sacred vessels of potential, even in our flaws, even in conflict. But when respect is gone, everything else starts to fall apart. The laughter becomes hollow. The apologies feel forced. The silence turns sharp. And you start to ask yourself, why am I still here? And maybe, just maybe, the answer is habit. Or guilt. Or fear. But Stoicism teaches us to see clearly. To live not by emotions alone, but by reason and virtue. And here's the truth, you cannot build a strong life on the crumbling foundation of disrespect. No matter how long you've known them. No matter what they've done for you in the past. A relationship without respect will eventually drain your soul, and you'll barely notice it happening, until you can't recognize who you are anymore. So if someone constantly belittles your ideas, dismisses your values, or treats your kindness as weakness, that's not love. That's imbalance. Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But when it comes to disrespect, the suffering is very real, especially when you allow it for too long. You deserve to be in relationships where your voice matters, your space is honored, and your presence is cherished. Anything less is simply not worthy of your time. If sign number 10 was about losing your peace, then sign #11 is about reclaiming your worth. And that brings us full circle. Because at the heart of every decision to walk away is not anger, but clarity. Clarity that you are allowed to grow. That you are allowed to choose peace. That you are allowed to walk away from what no longer respects the person you've worked so hard to become. And that, my friend, is not selfish. It's Stoic. Now that we've explored all 11 signs, take a breath. Not to decide quickly but to listen closely, to what your life has been whispering all along. Because sometimes, the deepest wisdom isn't something you learn. It's something you finally give yourself permission to accept. Let's wrap it up together. So here we are. 11 signs. 11 quiet truths. Each one a mirror asking you to look not at them, but at yourself. Not to blame. Not to shame. But to finally, see clearly. Because walking away from a relationship is not the end of love. Sometimes, it's the beginning of self-love. The Stoics never taught us to live without people. But they did teach us this: choose your company with care. Because who walks beside you will either water your soul, or drain it. And you deserve to walk this life with peace in your heart, with truth in your relationships, and with dignity in every step. So if you're at a crossroads right now, if your heart feels heavy from all you've heard, that's okay. Breathe. You don't need to act today. But you do need to be honest. Honest about where you are. Honest about who you've become. And honest about what you can no longer carry. Because at some point, growth asks for space. Peace asks for boundaries. And your future asks for release. Letting go isn't weakness. It's wisdom. And in the words of Marcus Aurelius, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. So let your thoughts be grounded, in courage, in clarity, and in the quiet strength of your own becoming. Compass, if this message spoke to something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Sparkles, like this video, speech balloon, comment, I choose peace, bell, subscribe to this channel for more Stoic wisdom every week. And most of all, share this with someone who might need it. Someone who's quietly carrying too much, and just needs one sign, to let go with grace. This is not the end. This is the beginning of your return to yourself. And if you're wondering where to go from here, the next step is waiting for you. Clapperboard watch, 12 Stoic secrets for doing your best, even when life gets hard, because once you've made space, it's time to rebuild stronger, truer, wiser.